My name is Omar Barghouti. I'm a Palestinian human rights defender and a co-founder of the Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions movement.
So your refugee background has made an impact on you. And could we say that that's part of the reason why you have gotten so involved in the BDS movement?
I think that's one of the reasons, yes. Another reason is that my father was one of the founders of the PLO in 1964, the same year I was born. So the PLO was very much part of our family. It wasn't a political movement only that represents all Palestinians. It was very much part of our upbringing.
Why BDS?
Because the boycott, divestment and sanctions call issued by the absolute majority of Palestinian civil society came after a long heritage of nonviolent Palestinian popular resistance as a very effective tool to bring about Israel's compliance with international law. Boycott has always been part of Palestinian resistance to settler colonialism, to occupation, to Israeli apartheid. And we felt that 1 year after the International Court of Justice at The Hague ruled that Israel's wall in the occupied territories was illegal, and seeing that the world has failed to react to even stop Israel's wall, Palestinians reached the conclusion that we've got to do what the South Africans did. Internal resistance alone was not enough. We need the world to end its complicity in Israel's violations of Palestinian rights. We need the world to isolate Israel academically, culturally, economically, militarily, to compel it to recognize Palestinian rights under international law. That's why we called for BDS, and that's why the absolute majority of Palestinian civil society signed on.
Does it work?
We think it does. One main indicator is Israel's reaction, which is always important. If it did not work, Israel would have ignored it. But in fact, since 2014, Israel has been dealing with the BDS movement as a strategic threat to its regime of oppression. And the Israeli president 2 years ago said the academic boycott alone was a strategic threat of the first order. Those are his exact words. This is because Israel's regime, despite its strength, its military power, nuclear weapons, and so on, doesn't know what to do with a non-violent, inclusive, anti-racist human rights movement like ours that calls for equal rights for Palestinians under international law. There's nothing in it that Israel can pinpoint to isolate the movement, and indeed it is growing, and its impact is growing.
But doesn't it mean no to dialogue, even with those who sympathize with the Palestinian cause within Israeli society?
Absolutely not. We have not just dialogue, we have partnership with Jewish Israeli groups, small groups, but effective groups, that have endorsed BDS from within and have called on the world to boycott Israel's regime. So far from stopping dialogue, it encourages dialogue, not just with partners, even with enemies. It increases the dialogue. It's a nonviolent movement that calls for nonviolent pressure. Israel's regime of occupation and apartheid could only continue denying us our rights because of international complicity. There is no way without international complicity for them to continue. This is precisely what we're aiming at. BDS does not target any identity, it targets complicity. So we do not target Israeli universities or cultural institutions because they're Israeli. We target them because they're involved in Israel's violations of our rights, or they're silent about Israel's apartheid regime against the Palestinians. So that's a very important point. It does not stop dialogue.
And you have examples of successes? Does it work?
Do we have a few hours? Because there's quite a few. But maybe to give a few examples, over the last few years, we've seen major multinationals bow to BDS pressure and pull out of their illegal projects in Israel. Veolia, the French company, was the first in September 2015 to end its illegal projects in Israel after losing more than $20 billion worth of contracts. After that, it was Orange, and G4S sold most of its business in Israel due to BDS pressure. And of course, G4S has claimed that it's because of financial reasons, not BDS. But our answer was, of course, that's how BDS works. It affects you financially. Major pension funds, especially church pension funds in the United States, have divested from companies like Caterpillar, Hewlett-Packard, that are invested in the occupation, that profit from the occupation. Even the Norwegian pension fund, which is a hard nut to crack, when the Ethics Council was still effective in Norway, did divest from at least a couple of companies involved in the settlements. So there are many examples of successes, and we've seen that major credit ratings agencies like Moody's have started to take BDS into consideration when evaluating the strength of Israel's economy.
And you're talking about smart boycott. Can you elaborate on that concept? How does it work as a smart boycott?
I think all BDS tactics are smart by definition, because we adopt operational principles that make them smart. Context sensitivity, which means activists, networks in any specific context and a specific country decide what to boycott, how to boycott, based on their particularities. There is no central command that tells anyone how to boycott, what to boycott. It's up to activists on the ground. The second is sustainability, that it's important to sustain our victories. Achieving a victory too fast is not necessarily good, because you might lose it too fast. And the third operational principle is gradualness. It's important to go from A to B to C, not to jump from A to Z, because otherwise you cannot sustain your victory if you jump too fast. Because we're not interested in an elite or isolated or a fringe movement. We're interested in mainstreaming BDS, because we're in it to achieve our rights. We're not in it to feel good.
So it means that we should aim for what is achievable, not necessarily the maximum full boycott, sanctions and divestment all at once.
Absolutely. And it depends on the context. So in the United States, for example, the belly of the beast, as it were, we already have academic associations like the American Studies Association, National Women's Studies Association, and others who have adopted a full boycott of Israel's academic institutions. But we cannot hope to achieve the same in Germany, for obvious reasons. So we have to moderate the demands based on the context, but we never lie about our goals: ending the occupation, ending the system of apartheid, and the right of Palestinian refugees to return. There is no discussion. All partners have to respect our rights under international law, and that's the minimum that we expect. But partners decide how to pursue supporting our rights through various BDS measures that suit their context.
What would you say are the most important goals or priorities currently for the movement internationally, and perhaps should also be for the local or national branches?
There are some global campaigns that we've focused on, like the military embargo, which is an extremely difficult sanction, and we know that in many cases it is not achievable, and it's a long-term project to pressure governments to sanction Israel by imposing military embargoes similar to those imposed on apartheid South Africa. But it's very important to keep raising that, to normalize the discussion of military embargoes of Israel because of its extreme violations and persistent violations of human rights. So that's ongoing. Banking is becoming a very important part of our global work. Israeli banks, as many human rights organizations have shown, are deeply involved in financing the occupation. And there is no major Israeli bank that is not involved. So it's important to end the complicity of international banks with Israeli banks. So that's a high priority. Corporate complicity and corporate responsibility campaigns are a very important part of BDS. The current most important campaign is focused on HP, Hewlett-Packard, which is involved in the siege of Gaza, in the checkpoints, in the segregation, in the very racist policies of Israel, are enabled by HP computing and networking. So that's a high priority. Despite pulling out almost completely from Israel, G4S remains a priority. The largest British-Danish security company is still involved in a project in Israel, in a police training project, no less, in occupied Jerusalem. So we're focused on continuing the pressure on G4S, because we think that when those multinationals pull out of Israel's illegal projects, they teach other corporations a lesson. So that's a very important part. The academic and cultural boycott are ongoing high priority for the movement, and it's not for no reason. We think that the brand Israel tries to protect its system of oppression by branding itself as an enlightened, modern society, and so on and so forth. We think the academic and cultural boycott plays a very important role in shattering this mask and revealing Israel's true face as a regime of occupation, settler colonialism, and apartheid. So the academic and cultural is extremely important. Overall, mainstreaming BDS is a top priority in whatever we do. We've got to reach more mainstream audiences, circles, and so on. Protecting the movement by defending the right to BDS is also a very high priority, because Israel's war on BDS aims at delegitimizing the movement.
This year, there are several anniversaries. There's 100 years of the Balfour Declaration. There's 50 years since the 67 war, and 70 years since the UN decision on or recommendation on the partition of Palestine. Do you have special plans or activities within the BDS movement for these anniversaries this year?
There is no central plan. I think partners, BDS partners across the world, are doing their own things. So it varies from one country to another. How to commemorate 100 years of the Balfour Declaration, clearly in the UK, that's a priority for the movement there. In other countries, it's not. Many partners are focusing on the 50 years of occupation, and some are focused as well on the partition plan of 1947. Some are focused on 10 years of siege of Gaza, for example.
Yes.
So there's so many anniversaries, as you mentioned, but there is no central theme. One thing that we said, we will use 2017 to intensify BDS activism on all accounts.
Thank you.
Thank you.